When I was 12, I attended a private school in a city far from my neighborhood. Because of this, I had to rely on public transportation to get home each day. This was in Hungary, where buses and trams were widely available, making commuting relatively easy. My usual routine was to take a bus from the stop outside my school to the central square and then switch to a tram that took me near a small park close to my apartment. From there, I had a short walk home. My school operated on a rotating schedule. One week we had morning classes, and the next, afternoon classes. This incident happened during one of my afternoon weeks. A few of my classmates and I left school together, chatting as we made our way to the bus stop. We all took the same bus to the central square. But after that, most of them were picked up by their parents, leaving only a couple of us to continue our journeys alone. When I boarded the bus, I spotted an empty seat near the back and took it without a second thought. Sitting behind me was a middle-aged man with thinning hair, wearing worn-out clothes that looked slightly unkempt. I wouldn't have paid him much attention if I hadn't immediately felt the weight of his stare. His gaze was unrelenting, cold, and unsettling. My instincts told me something was off. Trying to distract myself, I pulled a book out of my bag and pretended to read. I wished I could use my phone, but I had forgotten to charge it before leaving home. Despite my attempts to ignore him, I couldn't concentrate on my book. I didn't dare move or even let him see that I had noticed his staring. Maybe I thought that if I acted indifferent, he would lose interest. When we arrived at the central square, my classmates and I got off. Some headed home in different directions while my friend, Adam, and I walked toward the tram station. That's when I noticed the man getting off as well. He wasn't right behind us but kept a certain distance, just enough to make it obvious that he was following. I quietly told Adam about it, but I urged him not to look back. I thought ignoring him would be the best approach. At the tram station, people began splitting up as different routes arrived. Adam and I were both waiting for tram number 4, and unfortunately, the man remained nearby. I tried to act casual, but I was on edge. When the tram arrived, we boarded quickly, hoping to lose him in the crowd. But he got on too. As we neared my stop, I quietly whispered to Adam that I was considering getting off with him instead, just to be safe. Before we could decide, the man suddenly stood up and got off at my stop ahead of us. This made me second-guess my fear. Maybe it was just a coincidence? Maybe I was overreacting? Feeling slightly relieved, I got off as planned, waving goodbye to Adam as the tram moved on. The moment I started walking, I realized my mistake. A quick glance behind me confirmed my worst fear. He was following me again. My apartment was only a few minutes away, but every step I took, he took too. My heart pounded as I picked up my pace. When I turned onto the quieter street that led to my building, he sped up as well, closing the distance. I reached my building and frantically pressed the intercom button for my mom to buzz me in. I willed her to be quick, but just as the door clicked open, the man was right beside me. I could smell his stale breath as he suddenly spoke. "Hey, it's been a while. I just saw your uncle the other day. He told me you were doing great in school." That's when I knew he was lying. My uncle had been living abroad for months and hadn't visited. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do, so I just stared at him, frozen. The door finally unlocked, and I bolted inside without a second thought. I sprinted up the stairs to my apartment on the 3rd floor, my backpack weighing me down, but adrenaline kept me moving. I could hear him running behind me. My hands fumbled as I reached the door, where my mom was already standing, expecting me. Without a word, I shoved her aside and slammed the door shut, locking it immediately. My mom, startled, asked what was wrong. I barely managed to get the words out as I explained everything. She wasted no time calling the police. They arrived later that night and asked me for a description of the man. Unfortunately, since the street was dimly lit and I hadn't turned on the stairwell lights, the security cameras didn't capture his face clearly. For the next 2 weeks, I was too afraid to go home alone. My mom made sure to pick me up every evening. Then, one night, we saw a news report about a man who had been arrested for attempting to abduct children. When they showed his picture, my blood ran cold. It was him. The very man who had chased me that night. Relief washed over me, knowing he was caught, but I couldn't shake the realization of how careless I had been. If my phone had been charged, maybe I could have called someone. Maybe I would have felt safer. To this day, I make sure my phone is always fully charged before I leave home. And I always stay aware of my surroundings. Please, to anyone reading this, stay safe. Trust your instincts, and never let your guard down. Last summer, I had a terrifying experience that still gives me chills. I usually enjoy walking around my neighborhood, sometimes biking, but mostly just going on foot while listening to music. It was early evening, and the sun was starting to set when a dark-colored sedan slowed down beside me. At first, I assumed the driver was just pulling into a driveway nearby, so I didn't pay much attention. However, I quickly realized something was off when the car stopped right next to me, and a man stepped out. To give you an idea of the size difference between us, I'm about 5 feet 1 inch and barely over 100 pounds, while this man looked to be at least 6 feet 2 inches and significantly heavier. He had an unsettling air about him, but I tried to stay calm. "Hey there," he said casually. "Where are you headed?" I gave a short, neutral answer, "Just walking around." He nodded, then asked, "It's getting kinda late. Want to ride home?" That immediately set off alarms in my head. I quickly shook my head and responded, "No thanks, I don't even live around here." The moment I said that, his expression changed slightly. He looked at me more intently and asked, "Then why are you out here alone?" At that point, I stopped responding and picked up my pace, hoping he would take the hint and leave me alone. But instead, I heard his footsteps behind me. He was following me. My heart pounded as I walked faster, but so did he. Panic set in as I scanned my surroundings for any way to get to safety. That's when I noticed a house with its garage door wide open, and inside, an older man was sitting in a chair, drinking what looked like a can of soda. Without thinking twice, I darted into the garage. "Sir, please help me," I blurted out, my voice shaking. "That guy is following me." The older man stood up immediately, his expression hardening as he turned toward the stranger. "Hey, get lost," he barked, his voice firm. "I've got a gun, and I'm not afraid to use it." The man who had been following me froze for a moment before quickly backing away. He didn't say a word, just turned on his heel, hurried back to his car, and sped off down the street. I let out a shaky breath and turned to the older man. "Thank you so much," I managed to say. He gave me a concerned look and nodded. "You be careful out there. Always stay aware of your surroundings." That night, I sprinted all the way home, my heart still racing. I didn't stop until I was safely inside. To this day, I don't know what that man wanted, but I do know one thing: I never go out alone without being extra cautious anymore. Everyone, please stay safe. You never know who might be watching. I don't have any personal memory of this event since I was so young when it happened, but my family has told me this story many times. It's one of those unsettling things that makes me wonder how different life could have been if things had gone another way. I was around 2 years old at the time, and my older brother, Liam, who was about 6, and I were staying at our aunt's house. My mom, Liam, and I were outside in the front yard when she told us she needed to step inside for a moment. She figured my brother could keep an eye on me for a minute, but in reality, he was just a little kid himself. He should never have been left in charge of a toddler. Somewhere in that short window of time, someone grabbed me. My brother didn't even realize I was gone until my mom came back outside and saw that I had vanished. Panic immediately set in. My family started frantically searching, calling my name, running up and down the street. My uncle, who lived nearby, jumped into his car and started driving around the neighborhood, desperately looking for any sign of me. He had a gut feeling about who might have taken me, someone he already had suspicions about. He drove straight to that man's house and banged on the door, demanding answers. But there was no response. No movement inside. He was furious, on the verge of kicking the door down to get in, but someone must have talked him out of it because, in the end, they decided to call the police instead. When the cops arrived, they started patrolling the area, searching for me. After a while, they found me, standing alone several blocks away, right in front of the very house my uncle had suspected. There was no way I could have walked that far by myself, not at that age. I had only recently started walking and was still unsteady on my feet. My family believes that when the kidnapper heard sirens approaching, he panicked and dumped me outside, hoping to avoid getting caught. What's even more frustrating is that the police never made an arrest. As far as I know, they didn't even question the man. To this day, my family still talks about that terrifying night and how lucky I was to be found. The man who took me never showed his face around us again. But the thought of what could have happened still lingers in the back of my mind. This happened nearly 10 years ago, around 2015 or 2016. At the time, I was living with my boyfriend, and we had completely opposite work schedules. He worked overnight shifts while I worked during the day. Most nights during the week, I was home alone, which I was usually fine with, but sometimes it got a little lonely. One particular night, I was feeling restless, and to make matters worse, my favorite personal item had broken. So, I decided to make a late-night trip to a 24-hour adult store in the downtown area. My town was a mid-sized suburban place, not too big, not too small, with most of the nightlife clustered into one main street near the freeway. The drive from my apartment to the store was only about 10 minutes, and I figured it would be a quick in-and-out trip. I parked in the back lot behind the store. It was dark, with multiple alleyways leading to nearby bars and restaurants. As I walked toward the entrance, which faced the street, I noticed a man standing alone, smoking a cigarette. Something about the situation made me uneasy. At that hour, it wasn't uncommon to see people outside, but usually, they were in groups, heading home from the bars. He was just standing there. As I passed him, he said, "Hey." I responded with a quiet hi, but didn't make eye contact. That's when I got a better look at him. He had a shaved head, a long oversized t-shirt, baggy shorts, and sneakers with tall socks pulled up his shins. Nothing about his appearance was unusual for my town, but the fact that he was standing alone, watching me so intently, immediately put me on edge. The moment I passed him, he started moving. Not just in the same direction, but directly behind me, perfectly matching my pace. It was too deliberate to be a coincidence. My mind started racing. If I kept walking past the store, it would look like I was just going for a stroll, but that would mean leading him into a quieter, darker part of the street. Not an option. I considered ducking into one of the nearby bars, but that would only make it easier for him to approach me inside. My best bet was to get inside the store. It was well lit, and there would be people around. I entered, pretending I didn't notice him following me. He came in right after but didn't bother pretending to shop. Instead, he just loitered near the entrance, watching me. At first, I ignored him, hoping he'd get bored and leave, but after a few minutes, I heard him make a noise, just a small, deliberate sound, as if trying to get my attention. I didn't react. He did it again. And again. Feeling increasingly unsettled, I walked up to the cashier and whispered, "Do you know that guy? Does he work here?" The cashier looked confused. "What?" I glanced over my shoulder and lowered my voice even more. "That man at the front, he followed me inside." The cashier frowned but clearly hadn't caught on to my urgency. "What?" they asked again, louder this time. I was frustrated but had no choice but to say it outright. "That man followed me in from outside, and he won't leave me alone." Finally, the cashier understood. He walked to the front and told the man, "You need to leave." The man didn't move. The cashier came back and assured me he'd told the guy to go, but I could still see him standing near the entrance. Not wanting to lead him back to my car, I lingered, pretending to shop even though I'd already found what I came for. Every time I glanced up, he was still there. I told the cashier again, and this time, they got more aggressive. "Enough already. Get out." I stepped further into the back of the store, out of sight, as the confrontation continued. When I finally came back up to the counter, the man was gone. The cashier told me the guy had tried to act like he didn't understand English, but when he pulled out a bat from behind the counter and held it up, saying, "Do you understand this?" The man finally got the message and left. I paid for my items but was still uneasy about walking to my car, even though I had parked close. The cashier pointed to a small security monitor showing 4 camera angles from outside and told me the guy was gone. "If you see him again, just run back in," he said. I wished he could have walked me out, but I understood he couldn't leave the store unattended. Taking a deep breath, I gripped my car keys tightly, speed walked to my car, and unlocked it immediately. I got in, tossed my bag on the passenger seat, and started the engine. Just as I was putting my seatbelt on, I glanced at my side view mirror. And there he was. He was speed walking straight toward my driver's side door. My stomach dropped. But thankfully, my car had an automatic locking feature when it shifted out of park. Without a second thought, I slammed my foot on the gas and yanked the wheel, peeling out of my parking spot so fast it made him flinch and stop in his tracks. As I pulled away, I locked eyes with him through the window, giving him the coldest, most serious glare I could. I knew predators fed off fear, and I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. Something about that look must have worked because, as I pulled out of the lot, I saw him turn his head away and slowly retreat back to where he had been standing before, his posture slumped, like he had just lost a game. I, on the other hand, was overwhelmed with relief. When I got home, I told my boyfriend what had happened. His first reaction was to tell me that going out alone so late at night wasn't the smartest idea. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. I'm no longer with that person, but I still live in the same town. While it's not the most dangerous place in the world, it's also not the safest. I've made a rule for myself ever since that night: I never leave my house alone after 9 p.m. anymore. Because you never know who's watching.